dugsiga boardingka iyo maalinlaha ah ee Amano Boarding and Day School.
Amano Boarding and Day School. My name is Teacher Eric, and today we are having a lesson with grade 4s. So welcome. Last time we learned about weather and climate in our lesson, and it was enjoyable. I think most of you, the learners especially, have tried to look at the notes and some of the assignment that I gave. Today we shall now be looking at the relationship between the climate of a place and the plants and the animals and even people. Now, we know very well that any climate of a place, if the climate is hot or the climate is cold, then people and plants have to adapt. So we shall be looking at now the climate of an area actually affects the people and plants and even animals that live in that area. What do I mean? That if the climate is hot, then some plants must have a way in which they can live. They must adapt. They can have survival mechanisms, ways in which they can live in that hot area. And similarly, if the climate of a place is, for example, wet, then animals living in that area also will have to find mechanisms or will have to find ways in which they can adapt to living in that area. So we shall also have to realize this in our lesson, that plants that live in dry areas, for example in our district where we live, plants that live in dry areas have got very deep roots. Roots grow very deep. Why do they grow deep? They grow deep in order to absorb. And the key word we are using is absorb. In order to absorb. In order to absorb water. They actually grow deep in order to absorb water from underground. Now, they absorb water by bringing it up so that they can use water to make their own food, to survive, to live, because plants are also living things. Examples of such plants in our area where we live that are actually having deep roots that absorb water from the ground are, one, here we can see we have a plant like cactus. Cactus is an example of such a plant, and also an acacia. Now, most of you must have seen cactus. Cactus actually is a plant that can survive very well. It can survive well, and here is an acacia tree. Acacia tree is here. You must have seen it in our locality. Most of the trees actually people use even to burn charcoal. Most of them are acacia. You must have seen such a tree. It is actually called acacia, and it has very deep roots. It survives very well in a dry area. This is an example of such a plant. Next, we have a cactus. A cactus also is a plant that survives very well. And most of you, I think, in your local language, you call cactus tin. Tin. It's a plant that grows very well in dry area. Whether it rains or does not rain, cactus does not dry. It will continue growing. Now, look, a cactus has got a very fleshy stem. It has a thick stem in order to store water. It also has got very deep roots. We shall be looking at those roots. And what we mean is that for a cactus to grow very well, it actually needs what we call very deep roots. Like here we can see a cactus, actually the image here, the roots, its roots are located where we can see them. The roots of a cactus are here. All these are roots. They grow very deep into the soil. So it is clear that all these are actually examples of plants among very many other plants like euphorbia. We shall also be looking at them next time in our lesson. They adapt very well in plants which are dry. Now, the same to animals. Animals that live in dry areas have ways in which they behave, ways in which they can actually get to survive in a dry place. Same to animals that live in cold places. For example, in Somaliland, we have animals like camels, we have desert goats and sheep. These animals here, including even a donkey, have got ways in which they adapt to living in dry conditions. And in the next thing that we look at, already I've mentioned for you these animals, that they include camels, donkeys, desert goats, and all of them actually live in desert places. And a camel, for example, has got a hump in which it can store water for a long period of time, and that's why camels can stay in a desert. We also call them desert sheep. They can stay in a desert for a long time without water. Now, what about those that live in cold areas? Animals that live in cold areas have got what you call here, if I can just highlight it, allow me to do that. They have thick skin. Thick skin. Thick means that the skin is not thin, it is thick. Why? So that it can protect the animal from cold conditions. You understand that? And that is what basically we are looking at. Now, just moving forward, we also can look at a camel is here. Most of you know it. This is actually a camel. And features that are on a camel that enable it to survive very well in a desert is one, you can see here, the hump. This hump here actually helps the camel to store water, to store a lot of water that it can be converted. The water can be converted into fat and into energy later for use if there is no water at all. Then moving forward again, we shall also look at something different, and is here. Good. What can you see? This is a sheep. But what kind of sheep is this? It is not a black-headed sheep. We learned last time that black-headed sheep is the type of sheep that is found in Somaliland, but that one is good for meat. People keep it for its tasty meat. But this type of sheep here, if you look at it keenly, then you realize one thing, class, that this type of sheep has got a lot of wool. You see, it is actually having thick skin. There's wool everywhere. The wool is everywhere, as you can see here. All this is wool, and this type of sheep actually is well suited to live in cold areas, areas that are wet, areas that have a lot of rainfall. The temperatures are low. And how can it survive cold season? It does that by keeping itself warm using the thick skin that it has. Good. To the next. Now, what about the people who live in dry places? People who live in dry places, example in our district, normally practice nomadic pastoralism. Nomadic pastoralism is where people move with the animals from place to place, searching for water and pasture. Pasture means food for animals. Animals, just like human beings, need water, they need food. So people will move with these animals from one place to another, from place to place. And these people here do not practice farming. But people who live in places where the climate is cool, places where there is rain, such people are going to practice a different type of activity, and that activity will always be farming. These people here are going to practice farming, and the key word is farming. What do they do, or what do farmers do? Farmers are people who grow crops either for food or for selling. They also keep some domestic animals from which they can get milk, meat, and other products like butter and ghee and cheese, you know that. Good. we move to the next. Now, I think as we continue, you will realize that the picture here shows clearly a nomadic pastoralist, a person actually looking after his animals. And there's also another picture that is actually coming on, people taking care of their animals. These are nomadic pastoralists. These are people who carry out this activity because they live in a dry place. They live in dry conditions. Well, so basically, people who live in cold places usually put on heavy clothes. That's also another interesting thing. How do they adapt to living in cold places? They put on heavy clothes. Here in our place where we live, in our district, whenever it's dry, do we put on heavy clothes? No, definitely no. What do? We put on light clothes. We do not put on heavy clothes. We have to find a way in which we can live. Well, those people actually who live in cold places will have pullovers, will have pajamas, will have jackets, will have sweaters, among other different heavy clothes. And so, just to sum up what we have done today in our lesson class, we have basically looked at the relationship between climate and the people and animals and plants that live in that area. And we have said, for example, people who live in dry areas and animals that live in dry areas and even plants will find ways in which they can survive, in which they can live. For example, plants that live in dry areas, like we've said, will always have deep roots. Will always have deep roots in order to absorb water. But plants that live in wet areas do not have deep roots. Same to animals. Those that live in dry areas have got thin skin, while those that live in cold places have got thick skin. All right? So, thank you for watching and listening. Next time, we shall look at some other important things. But do not forget that at the end of this lesson, there are some questions that we shall be posting on our website, which you'll have to attempt. Then we shall look at the correction next time. Thank you for listening. Bye.